Hey there, today I'm going to be testing the Intel ARC A380 on a whole bunch of Minecraft shaders at 1080p resolution. But first of all, I'm pairing this with a Intel Pentium G7400, which will not bottleneck this graphics card in this game, as well as 32GB of DDR4 RAM running at 3200 MHz. Without further ado, let's get into Minecraft. To play with Minecraft shaders, you need to have mods installed. It's actually not built into the game, and the mods I used that are needed to play with the shaders are Iris, Sodium, Fabric API, Lithium, and Phosphor. Starting off, I am starting without shaders to get a baseline of how the game runs, and without shaders at 1080p on the medium settings, all the settings are staying the same besides the shaders I'm using, by the way. So at the medium settings, the game was getting roughly 100 frames per second on average, and the 1% lows were 1. Yeah, 1 frame per second, 1% lows. That is really bad, and no, that is actually not CPU related. You'll see later on, the CPU is capable of more than that. The game is playable, but it is extremely laggy when walking around and loading chunks. Starting off are the Sora Shaders version 1.142, and they ran rather interestingly. So, the game was getting about 60 frames per second on average, sometimes getting into the 70s. Though the 1% lows were still extremely low, they were around 20. But to add to that, the shaders are actually broken, it seems, because the shadows can't work out if they want to be loaded in or out. And shadows only load in when you walk up to them, but if you, for example, walk one block, all of a sudden all the shadows disappear or appear again. So I do not know what's going on with the Sora shaders. I also tried the shaders on my RTX 3060, and they had the exact same problem. The next shaders I am testing are the medium Sildur Vibrant shaders on version 1.50, and the game was getting roughly 60 frames per second on average, though it was an absolute stutterfest once again. The 1% lows were around 10 frames per second, and this is actually almost unplayable from how much it was stuttering. Even though these are the newest Sildur Vibrant shaders, they were as well broken on my RTX 3060, having the same weird problem where the shadows would only show up when you're right next to the blocks. Otherwise, there is no shadows. Next up is SEUS PTGI E12, and these shaders actually worked properly and look somewhat decent, though the thing is, the game was getting roughly 14 to 16 frames per second on average, which is again unplayable. So it's the trend so far. The trend has been unplayable. Now there's also something I need to add. Throughout all of these shaders, you will notice the graphics card usage doesn't really go above 80%, 80%. I don't know why, actually I do know why, it's something to do with the drivers, but I don't know why the drivers don't work specifically in Minecraft, because every other game works. Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, Minecraft works too, just the performance is really poor. But hey, at least they were good enough to go over and play with the fancy shadows in this shader pack. So that's something. The SEUS renewed version 1.0.1 ran at roughly 28 frames per second on average, and as well was extremely stuttery. And once again, you'll notice the graphics card is not really maxed out. So there's that. There's not really much to say about this. It's the same result as the last result. Not really too playable, there's not really a reason to play like this, but hey, at least it works, so there's that. The next shaders up are ProjectLUMA version 1.32, and ProjectLUMA is not very good at all. So it's a little bit worse looking because, again, the shaders are broken, still broken on the RTX 3060, and to add to that, it's blinding green. Yeah, so there's not really much to say about it besides there's no reason to really play with ProjectLUMA, at least currently. But hey, at least it ran somewhat decently. It was getting about 60 frames per second, if you ignore the humongous stutters every few moments, that is. Lagless Shaders Lite version 1.10.2 ran pretty interestingly. So the shaders were actually perfectly fine, at least from the looks of them. There wasn't really anything that looked glitchy. It was still blindingly green though. Besides that, the game ran at roughly 85 frames per second on average, which is far higher than all of the other shaders, which is awesome. These shaders are actually known to be extremely easy to run, but that doesn't really help the fact that it was an absolute stuttery mess. But hey, at least it was actually, at that point, getting somewhat playable, if you don't mind the game freezing every few moments, to give you a 1% low of around 10 to 15 frames per second. The Continuum Shaders version 2.0.4 were extremely broken. I couldn't even see anything, unless you count black and white weird smeared all over the screen something. Yeah, but the game was actually running at least a little bit decently, around 40 frames per second. The 1% lows were at 0 though, so there's also that. One way or another, the Continuum Shaders are completely broken on the Intel ARC A380. And yes, I said on the Intel ARC A380, because on my RTX 3060, they ran perfectly fine. If anything, they were actually pretty awesome on the RTX 3060. So something is up with the drivers on the Intel graphics card causing the Continuum Shaders to just give up, basically. To be fair, they were slightly broken on the RTX 3060, and in some cases, yes, the shadows did pop in and out, but it wasn't nearly to the level of the ARC A380. The Complementary Shaders on version 4.3.3 was running at roughly 35 frames per second on average, and you might notice that the graphics card usage is only at a roughly 65 to 70% used, which is barely anything. And you are probably thinking, okay, well, you're most certainly CPU bottlenecked here. Well, no, I'll show you in a moment, we aren't. But either way, the game is not running very good at all on the ARC A380. It's getting about 35 frames per second, and the stutters are constant, basically. Either way, on my RTX 3060 with the same CPU, the game is able to get over 100 frames per second on average at 1080p. And even the RTX 3060 is maxed out. So if the RTX 3060 is maxed out, there's no reason that the Intel ARC A380 shouldn't be, unless it's driver related. Chocopic 13 version 9.1 Extreme was not running very good. It was getting about 40 frames per second on average, and the 1% lows were about 0. So, all in all, very bad. And to add to that, it had the same problem as a lot of the other shaders, where the shadows would just simply pop in and out and couldn't decide what they wanted to do. Most of the time the shadows were not really showing, and then another part of the time they were showing just fine. But one way or another, the shaders are broken on the RTX 3060 too, and all in all, these shaders are pretty much unplayable, because they're so broken. I also tried Chocopic Shaders V8 Ultra, which is a older build of the shaders, and they were as well completely broken. The BSL Shaders on version 8.1.01 was actually not very good. So I was playing on the medium shader settings, and the game was running at roughly 40 frames per second on average, and it was basically constantly stuttering. But it actually did properly work, which is a nice bonus, because a lot of the shaders I have don't work for some reason. Even if I go over and update them, they don't work. I don't know what's up with that, but one way or another, at least the BSL shaders work, and they worked pretty decently. Although I still wouldn't play with the BSL shaders because the performance is so poor. So overall, I will give the Intel ARC A380 a score of adequate when it comes to playing with Minecraft shaders. Yes, you can get 30 frames per second, and yes, the game runs fine when you don't have shaders running. Granted, it is actually slower even without shaders than my RTX 3060, but one way or another, it is definitely held back by drivers at this current moment, though if there is a driver update that does fix this in the near future, I will of course make an update video on that. But I do not recommend getting this if all you're trying to do is play Minecraft with shaders. Either way, if you want to see the full review, I have it linked here on screen. Either way, thank you for watching, and have a nice day.